Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I first heard about the Stardust Ranch while listening to The Belief Hole. Three brothers who do a pretty good job telling weird tales while still being entertaining. I've received a few emails and some comments regarding their podcast. Apparently, some of my listeners like them as well. They mentioned how they had first heard about the ranch listening to Tony Merkel on the Confessionals. The show was from a few years ago, and I had to dig around in order to find it. The more I listened, the more I wanted to know, so I ordered the book and I read it. The book is, and I know this sounds cliché, so much better than the podcasts or the videos. Here is what I was able to understand from the book and several of the podcasts, as well as a bunch of videos that I tracked down over the last couple of weeks. If you've read the book or heard the podcasts, there may be some inconsistencies due to things having been remembered after the book was written. The book has things in it never talked about on the radio or the podcasts. Some podcasts mention things not in previous shows. There are some people who identified Joyce as being a retired FBI agent. She was actually support staff and she was still working during the early times at the ranch. Some podcasts have incidents that I missed due to not watching every one, while others might have gotten information I couldn't find. Tony Merkel was about the best since he was actually interviewing John on his podcast a few years ago. In 2009, John Edmonds and his wife bought a 3,400 square foot ranch-style house that had 10 acres of property. It was called the Stardust Ranch, located in Rainbow Valley, Arizona. The ranch was on the extreme west edge of the metropolitan Phoenix. It was a dream home with 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a swimming pool, lots of land. John was sick and tired of working as a counselor trying to help others get to the bottoms of their problems. He wanted to live his own life for a change. The ranch was set off the side of the road far enough that any traffic going by was seen but not heard. Along with the main house, there were stables, a barn, a work shed. While visiting the house for purchase, they had seen that the previous owners still had the place full of furniture. Not a big deal, it just needed to be removed. And they had to try to imagine their own things in the house. The furniture and the appliances were all kind of high-end stuff. It looked like the folks there before could have driven up and taken up their lives without having to change anything. The house was ready to go. Well, John wanted the ranch as soon as he had visited. He kind of fell in love with the place. His wife, Joyce, she didn't like it. She felt uncomfortable right from the beginning. They hashed it out And John, knowing a lot about psychology, was apparently able to convince her that this was going to be their dream home. He'd been saving up for this moment, and he called the realtor and said they wanted the place right away. He paid cash for it, and he mentioned to the realtor that the previous folks still had their things everywhere. The realtor handed over the keys, and John drove out to the ranch in a rental truck, filled with all of their possessions. Joyce followed behind with their vehicle. Pulling up to the house, John opened the front door and froze. The people selling the place hadn't removed anything. The ranch house was filled with somebody else's stuff. Well, John got on the phone to the realtor, telling her the other people's things had to be removed so they could put their own things in. The realtor said she could no longer get a hold of the original owners, but she would get a crew to drive out and remove the furniture. She would take all that stuff and put it in storage somewhere. She told John that him and his wife should drive into town and relax for a bit while the house was emptied out. John and Joyce drove to the small town of Buckeye to have dinner and relax. After several hours, the sun was going down and they were both tired, so back to their no home they went. The house was empty. All the furniture was now gone. It was well after dark, and neither John nor Joyce felt like doing an all-nighter, so they dragged their mattress into the bedroom and made the best of it. The next morning, intent on making the house a home, they began moving in. John glanced outside towards the empty pool, and he noticed something was sticking up from the edge. He stepped outside and looked down into what should have been a dry, empty swimming pool. The thing was filled with furniture. There was a big screen TV, a refrigerator, stove, radios. Everything that had been in the house was now piled up in the pool. John got a bit mad, thinking whoever the realtor had hired were a bunch of idiots. He got on the phone to the realtor's office. Well, she told him that she had not been able to get a crew to go empty the house out. Also, as far as she was concerned, now that John had paid for the place, it was his problem. So long, thanks for the business, don't call back. John didn't give the name of the realtor, so we can't think bad thoughts about her. John was now stuck having to move all their things into the house, and then he'd have to move all of the other people's things out of the pool. The rental truck had to go back to town, so he wasn't going to be able to use it once it was empty. Over the next several months, John would drag the furniture out to the side of the road, just past his gate. Anyone driving by could stop and grab things from the pile. Chairs, TV, a refrigerator, all the former residents' possessions. Even their clothing and pictures wound up on the side of the road. Nobody ever showed up who said they used to live there or that they owned any of the trashed items. Joyce was still working in Phoenix, so she would get up early, grab some coffee, and drive into town. She said it was about an hour drive each way. John was now a rancher. He had brought his collection of dogs out and put them in the stables. Each dog had its own kennel. These were Rottweilers, big dogs. I have a hard set rule. I refuse to have any pets bigger than me. If Mark gets a bit angry, I can pick him up and set him down outside. I just watch the sharp bits in the front. When a big dog wants something, who are you to say no? John was working in the stables one day, and he spotted a man walking towards him up the front driveway. This guy looked a bit rough. He had long hair, no sleeves, kind of like Larry the Cable Guy. He was wearing ratty old blue jeans. What caught John's attention was this man was carrying a machete. Living far from town, John had a revolver in his belt. Anyone who wanted to live out in the country had best know how to use firearms and have a few around. A call to 911 could be followed by about a 30-minute wait. John walked out to meet this stranger. He asked what the man wanted. The stranger said he was staying on the ranch. He worked there, keeping the monsters away. John must have looked the guy over and come to the conclusion that his elevator wasn't making the top floor. John went on to inform this guy whatever arrangements he'd had with the former owners ended with them leaving. John had looked over the outbuildings and had never seen any sign of anyone staying in any of them. The stranger walked away as if considering John to be the crazy one. Just like in the book, some of my details are going to be a bit off. From the time of these occurrences until the book was written was about 10 years or so. Listening to the various podcasts, I heard some things in a different order, and some details are not mentioned. Bruce MacDonald wrote the book about the Stardust Ranch, along with Joyce Edmonds. MacDonald was born in Ottawa, Ontario. He has a journalism degree from Ryerson University in Toronto. He worked in Canada and the United States, and on occasion he would go to Europe as a technical writer, an editor, and a designer. In 2014, he moved to the province of Limon, Costa Rica, where he lived in a small farm in Talamanca Mountains with his wife. He was tired of big city life, and boy did he change it. Kind of like what John and his wife had done. John wanted to tell the story about all the weird things that had happened to him and his wife while on the ranch. MacDonald started writing the book, and then he stopped. He moved to Costa Rica into a small cabin in the jungle. After ignoring the book for 10 years, Bruce finally got going on it once again after receiving a lot of weird proddings from folks who had no idea that he was working on any book. Unfinished things needed to be taken care of, and things like that. Bruce got a hold of John, and between them they managed to get the book finished over the internet. Immediately after moving in, John and sometimes Joyce began experiencing some strange phenomenon. It kind of started with strange lights seen in the sky. They would also hear unidentifiable noises out in the desert at night. They thought they had trespassers sneaking around on the property. They would catch a glimpse of a shadow moving past a window. The sounds of footsteps just beyond the edge of the lights at night. Any time they went to look, there was never any sign of people having walked around out there, yet they would hear them passing by. John said he'd be working on something on the ranch, and suddenly he would become extremely angry for no reason. The emotions would seem to come from out of the blue. Being trained in psychology, he would try to analyze himself, but he never managed to make any headway. He had no idea why these emotions were so strong or where they were coming from. Things would go missing. Small things like the keys to his Jeep. He knew that he had set the keys on the table near the door, only to find them not there when he needed them. The keys would suddenly reappear in strange ways. On a few occasions, they literally fell from the ceiling, sometimes hitting John in the head. A furniture was being moved in the middle of the night. Not far, but enough it was noticeable. The couch may no longer be centered on the wall. A chair from the dining room might be found in the hallway. Things you would notice, yet not be able to say that something was really going on. The longer they stayed at the ranch, the more things would be noticeably out of place. One morning, John discovered one of his dogs had been killed. He said it looked like it had been flattened. If you watched The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, you may remember one of the past residents said one of their dogs was killed by being flattened. He said it looked like it had been run over by something big and heavy. The dead dog at the Stardust Ranch was similar, if not the same. What got John to wondering was why none of the other dogs had barked or howled during the attack. The dead dog was in its kennel right next to all of the others. He contacted the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office to file a report, but what can you say? Something squished my dog flat? The deputy took his statement and left. Living out of town, John wanted a landline in case his cell phone wasn't able to connect. He contacted the phone company and asked for somebody to come out and hook up the phone lines. He had discovered that the house was fixed up with several lines, only they needed to be reconnected. The phone company said they'd send a technician out at a certain time in a few days. The day came and went without anyone from the phone company coming to the ranch. John called them back, and he wanted to know why they had neglected to fulfill the scheduled appointment. The folks at the phone company said they used contract technicians in such out-of-the-way locations. They promised him that somebody would be around soon. At long last, a truck showed up, and a telephone repairman was there to work on the lines. The phone guy asked if John knew anything about the ranch. Well, John knew some of the history, but not what the locals all knew. If I can get this in the right order, the ranch had been built by a man for his wife. As soon as the house was ready, the man brought her out to see it. His wife had immediately said she was not going to live there. There was something wrong with the land. Well, the builder wound up selling the ranch to another family. When their son graduated from high school, he killed himself with a shotgun. The second owner of the ranch packed his bags and moved, selling the ranch to a motorcycle club, or gang, depending on who you ask. This group was called the Sons of the Gestapo. At least that's what they're supposed to be called. Yet nobody can find any reports or any evidence of the group ever actually existing. The motorcycle guys got sideways with the law after they were accused of derailing a train. A shootout took place in the yard around the house. The entire gang was either killed or wound up in jail. Oddly, there's no arrest report at the jail, and there's no record of the Sons of the Gestapo ever actually existing. The FBI still insists the gang was responsible for the derailment, but FOIA requests keep going unanswered. Who were the Sons of the Gestapo, and did they ever actually exist? The property was then bought by a group who turned it into a brothel. Women of negotiable affections, as Terry Pratchett would say. This was why there were so many phone lines running to the ranch house. The house of ill repute closed after a murder took place inside the main building, and the ranch was sold once again. The new owner might have been the folks who left all their possessions behind, but the story got extremely foggy. The phone guy got the landline hooked up and left, having passed on the stories of who had lived and died on the ranch. John would drive his Jeep out to the desert, and he'd look for anything of interest. One day, he found a couple of horses wandering about. They were in sad shape and in need of food and water. John drove back to the ranch, grabbed a few gallons of water and some food, and went back out. He dropped off the supplies and left, wondering who these animals belonged to. During a trip into Buckeye, John asked about the horses he'd seen. He was told that some not too nice people would abandon their horses once it became too expensive to maintain them. Some folks don't deserve to have animals. Some people are bigger animals than the creatures they keep. John loaded his Jeep up with feed and drove out to where the abandoned horses were. By slowly dropping off food, he was able to lead the horses back to his ranch. Once there, he put them in the pens. Practically overnight, John had become a rancher with real livestock. One morning, he found one of the horses dead. Once more, there'd been no sound of fear from the other animals. They all stood in the stalls as if nothing had happened. John became quite well known to the sheriff's department, making complaints and statements as to what was happening on his ranch. The horse had been mutilated right there in its stall. Yet there was no evidence of who or what had done it. During one of his ventures into the desert, John stepped out from his Jeep and passed out. He woke up laying in the dirt. Once he got back to the ranch, he discovered his skin had been badly sunburned. He figured he'd been laying in the sun for hours with no memory of what happened. He tried to rationalize this as being just too much heat. What else could it be? The shadows seen passing the windows were now being seen inside the home. It looked as if someone was walking by casting a shadow, only no one was there. John and Joyce began thinking maybe their house was haunted. Maybe it was the son of the former owner who'd committed suicide. Or it could be the motorcycle guys that were killed during the shootout. Perhaps it was that woman who had died in the house. Nothing too extreme, just a bunch of ghosts. John met a guy in town who was one of the higher-ups in the local church. The subject of weird things happening, and then the shadows came up. The man in town said the property needed to be blessed. All these restless spirits were causing these troubles. A good Bible reading accompanied by some prayers should do the trick. John invited the man and his fellow churchgoers to come out and see what they could do. Joyce was in Phoenix when the blessing was going to take place. John saw a minivan come driving up with 3 men inside. There was the guy from town, and he was accompanied by 2 younger men. They each carried a Bible. The men got started walking around the outside, doing their religious best. Things got interesting once they moved inside. One of the young guys suddenly ran out the door. He refused to get out of the van. He closed the doors and the windows and he locked them. Then the other 2 had something happen as well. The 3 men left without telling John anything about what they'd seen or what else he could do. It's kind of like they said, "You're on your own, Jack. We're out of here." Too many ghost investigators have this attitude. They go looking for something, and when they find it, it scares the pants off of them, and they scream and run. He and his wife were living on a haunted ranch, inside a haunted ranch house, and they had no idea what they were going to do about it. Joyce wanted to call it quits. This ranch was no place to live. The drive to her job was too long and the ranch was too creepy. As she said, she was never getting enough rest at night, and she wanted to make up for it while in town. She would stay at a friend's house, catching a few winks. John had sunk his entire life savings into the ranch, and he wanted it to work. Any time the subject of selling and moving came up, it would lead to an argument with neither side winning. John was becoming a bit paranoid. Just 'cause you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't out to get you. He bought a few more guns, followed by a few more. He began keeping knives and baseball bats in strategic locations so he could defend himself. One night, while laying in bed, John saw a shadow moving about the bedroom. It was getting closer with each passing second. Reaching down beside the bed, he found his baseball bat. Lifting it, he sprang out of bed and hit the shadow in the head. Instead of falling to the ground, it vanished. John said that he had felt the impact as the bat made contact, yet there was nothing there. Several days later, possibly months, while sitting in the living room cleaning some motorcycle parts, he heard a very subtle buzzing sound, kind of like the ballast on a fluorescent light when it begins to go bad. The sound seemed to be coming from the hall, so he peeked in that direction. He saw movement in the hallway. Just someone or something peeking around the corner. Acting naturally, John got up and walked to the bedroom, where he grabbed one of his pistols. From there, he slipped out the side door and into the hall, behind whoever was standing there. In the hallway stood 3 gray aliens. John was still mad about finding his dog as well as his horse dead. He decided these aliens were responsible for the killings and he wanted revenge. He fired at one of the aliens, hitting it dead center. The 3 grays all just kind of stepped through a portal and vanished. John realized that his house wasn't haunted after all. He had aliens, as from outer space, running around. The Greys were causing all the trouble that him and his wife had been having. John and Joyce both began noticing weird marks on their skin. This was in the morning, and they couldn't figure out what was causing these marks. Bruises and abrasions, a skin irritation in odd places, kind of like a rash where there shouldn't be one. The problem wasn't spirits, it was aliens acting as if they were ghosts. Recently, I've heard from others who were convinced that they had seen a ghost only to later discover through hypnosis that they'd been abducted. Aliens have been disguising themselves as spirits of the dead. I met Daryl Sims in Edinburgh last year. He talked about how aliens will place memories in a person's mind to cover up their abductions, making it seem to be nothing more than a bad dream. To add to the false memory, they add a second memory in case the first one doesn't hold. Maybe a ghost sighting. If a person were to seek hypnosis therapy and have the false memory erased, the second one would still mask the incident. Travis Walton has said that he has heard for years about aliens impersonating ghosts and spirits. This makes me wonder just what are the Greys doing and why are they hiding behind other entities? I still believe in ghosts, but now any time I look into a haunting, I'll have to try to figure out, is it ghosts or aliens? Since the church folks couldn't help, it was time to get a hold of the UFO people. John contacted a UFO research group and he talked about some of the things going on at the ranch. He became a regular poster on their website. UFO researchers would drive out to the ranch and look for any kinds of alien evidence. One day, John was visiting with a neighbor while cleaning a few of his weapons. He was showing the man how to field strip and clean rifles and pistols so his neighbor would be able to do the same at home. They were set up on a table out in the yard. John was facing the front gate as he worked. A black SUV pulled to a stop at the gate. Two men got out, both dressed in dark suits. They walked towards the gate as if they were coming on to the ranch. John expected them to stop at the gate and yell to him to come over and open the gate or at least talk to them. The two men walked to the gate and they passed right through it. They didn't open the gate. They walked through the metal without so much as a hitch. This got John's full attention. He watched them walking up to the table. His neighbor was just as shocked as he was. The two men came to a halt a few feet from the table. They were dressed the same, black hats and suits. They had very pale skin, and they looked as if they didn't belong on our planet. Without any introduction or show of identifications, one of the MIBs told John to stop posting on the UFO sites and stop talking about his encounters. The MIBs turned and walked back to the front gate, passing right through it, and then drove away. His neighbor freaked out and left. He didn't want to talk about what he'd just seen. John continued working his ranch. These alien encounters were going on over years, and it's amazing how people can get used to just about anything. Look at how fast folks adjusted to wearing their face diapers. I still have one, but I only use it when I absolutely have to. If a store insists I wear a face diaper, I'll usually not shop there. Kind of the same as any store showing a 30-06 sign in their window. If you don't know what that is, it's a sign saying you can't carry concealed even with all the proper licenses. It's their choice to not allow weapons in their store, and it's my choice to not spend my money there. John got used to the weird things going around the ranch. Joyce was getting there slowly. She hadn't seen all the things he had, but she still thought it would be a good idea to sell. John and Joyce made the best of things. They continued living their lives as a normal married couple. On Fridays, they would drive into town for a date night. John was waiting for his wife so they could get going. They were heading into Phoenix for dinner. He walked outside to kind of look around and then made his way to their vehicle. Joyce came out and they got in and headed to town. At the restaurant, they got a table and they ordered their drinks. Joyce excused herself to go to the ladies' room. John sat there for a bit, and then he thought, well, he's going to check his phone and see if he had any messages. He had several missed calls from Joyce. There was a voicemail. John clicked on it, and he was surprised by the message. Joyce wanted to know where he was. At first, John thought this was some kind of a joke, as she must have been texting him from the bathroom. The voicemail was from the house phone. He called the house and Joyce answered and wanted to know why he had driven off without her. John was at a loss. If Joyce was at home, who was the woman that had ridden into town with him? As he sat there with nothing but questions, Joyce, or what looked like Joyce, came walking back to the table. She sat down and looked at him. Realizing he knew she wasn't his wife, the creature on the other side of the table just stared. The eyes were solid black. There was no sclera, the white part. She, or it, stood, walked to the door, and left. John paid the tab and ran to the parking lot. The creature was gone. He drove back to the ranch, and then he had to do his best to answer Joyce's questions. This really screwed up their date night. John kept getting more and more paranoid as time went on. He kept weapons all over the house. He would sneak around at night looking for the Greys any time he saw any kind of a shadow or any movement. During one encounter, he got a drop on 3 Greys. He aimed and fired at one. It was hit, but it didn't fall. Instead, all 3 just popped through the portal once again. With his ears ringing from the blast, John looked for any sign that he had hit a thing. The bullet had left the gun, but it didn't hit the wall. There was no sign that the Greys had been there, but he knew he'd fired. All his firearms seemed to be of little use when dealing with these aliens. It's a bit odd how sometimes we'll receive things we need not knowing that we need them at the time. John had been in town and he was driving back home. Up ahead was a truck piled high with boxes and furniture. It was just one more vehicle on the road. The truck hit a bump and a long, thin box bounced from the load, landing on the road. John pulled ahead and he stopped and picked up the box. He jumped back in his vehicle and drove on, hoping to return the box to its owner. The other vehicle was gone. It must have turned off somewhere, but John couldn't find it. The box wound up going out to the ranch along with him. Once at home, John opened the box to see what the other driver had lost. It turned out to be a katana, or a samurai sword. The sword wound up under his side of the bed. Late one night, John heard a buzzing sound once more. He'd noticed that this sound was there when the Greys were in the process of moving through their portal. Once they were through, the sound would stop. The aliens popped back into the hallway. John saw them out of the corner of his eye. He acted like he hadn't seen them. He continued watching TV. At the commercial, he stood and walked to the bedroom, like he was going to go to the bathroom. Grabbing the sword, John ran to the hallway, and with one clean swing, he took one of the Greys' heads right off. "That's for killing my dog," he said. Oh, this wasn't at night, this was in the daytime. The body fell to the floor. The other 2 Greys blinked out of existence. John looked at the dead body now laying on the floor, oozing liquids. The head was a short ways away. There was alien blood all over the wall and the floor. He looked at the mess, the body, the walls. Now what? He had found their weakness. Shoot them and they just jump back through their portal. Chop their heads off and you have a dead alien body. Now who are you going to call? John lifted the body and he carried it out to the freezer and put it in along with all the frozen food they kept on hand. He went back and he got the head and placed it next to the body. Great. Now he's got a dead alien in his freezer. Contacting the UFO researcher, John arranged to send samples to W.C. Levengood, who was going to test the samples to see where they may have come from. Levengood later sent back a report saying that the samples were not human or any living creature on Earth. They resembled a cross between plant and animal. William C. Levengood was a pioneering biophysicist and a longtime resident of Grass Lake, Michigan. He'd been educated at the University of Toledo, Ball State University, and the University of Michigan. Levengood worked as a research physicist at the Institute of Science and Technology and the Department of Natural Resources at the University of Michigan from 1961 through 1970. He was later employed as the Director of Biophysical Research and as a consulting scientist for various private sector companies. Because of his wide-ranging scientific curiosity, he maintained a well-equipped laboratory at his home in Grass Lake. William Levengood died September 28, 2013, at 88 years of age. As far as I could find, there's nothing too suspicious about his death. Still, he was the one looking at samples from a dead alien. The official report said he tripped, fell, hit his head while working in his lab. As for the samples and the body, everything relating to the dead gray vanished. Let's face it, the government and the MIBs knew that John was being visited by Greys, and they knew that he was in possession of a body. Someone must have cleaned out the lab after Levengood had his accidents. They also slipped onto the ranch and took any evidence from there. John says he's a light sleeper. Any sound would bring him awake. He awoke one night to find his wife was not in bed. He figured she must be in the bathroom, but the light wasn't on. He found her laying on the ground outside. She had no idea how she had gotten there. Several weeks later, John awoke to find Joyce was levitating from the bed. Her unconscious body began to drift out the door and along the hallway. John tried to stop her from drifting and had to wake her up. Eventually, he got her to wake, and she immediately fell to the floor. He had to explain to her how she had gotten to where she was. Months later, he wasn't so successful. Joyce drifted down the hall and out the door to the yard. John was trying to wake her, but it was no use. Outside, he spotted a huge disc hovering over the yard, and Joyce was being drawn up towards it. Grabbing his AK-47, John fired at the flying saucer. He emptied one magazine and slapped in a new one. He kept firing until the light went out and his wife fell to the ground. The saucer shot away, and Joyce was bruised and sore, but she wasn't abducted. At least, not that time. With so much notoriety, John was getting phone calls from people who A, thought he was nuts, B, wanted to visit the ranch for all manner of reason, C, wanted to buy the place, and D, they wanted to help with some of the problems at the ranch. One of the folks who wanted to buy the place used to own a similar ranch in Utah. The one now on TV about UFOs and shadow people and weird anomalies. Skinwalkers. This gazillionaire wanted to buy the ranch, but he wasn't offering nearly as much as John had paid. John felt he was being lowballed, and he didn't want to lose what he had invested. The gazillionaire already had bought a second bizarre ranch, and he was looking to make it a third. John was told if he didn't sell, he would probably find his land being acquired by the government anyway. One of the folks who called with an offer of help was Dr. Brandy Howe. Brandy L. Howe, D.D., that's a doctor of divinity, called and asked if she could come by the ranch and see what was going on. Dr. Howe has over 25 years' experience in the study of alternative integrative healing. She's a Reiki master and a teacher, an animal intuitive, electromagnetic stress reduction practitioner. She's a certified organic skincare consultant and a licensed facilitator for Joyful Child Inc. Dr. Howe's studies include herbology, pharmacology, nutrition, aromatherapy, iridology, homeopathy, polarity therapy, acupressure, reflexology, animal communication, spiritual and behaviorment counseling. And she's also an alien, as in from some other planet. According to the book, Dr. Howe is what's known as a volunteer, as she is hosting the spirit of a being from another planet. Her and two of her fellow visitors drove out to the ranch to help John and Joyce with their alien problem. Each of them was carrying a sword when they arrived. They said this was the only thing that would work against the Greys. When the doctor and her two companions arrived in 2011, they got busy cleansing the place. The spirit of the boy who'd shot himself was sent on to the next plane of existence. The three moved around the house and they used smudging and prayers to get rid of any spirits hanging around. In the living room, the doctor said there was a portal. As everyone watched, it seemed open, and there were three figures seen just the other side of this doorway. They went outside, and as John and Joyce and the three visitors stood there, a huge ship appeared in the sky overhead. John and his wife were told that this ship was there to protect them from the other aliens. A bolt of lightning hit the ground a short ways away. The electricity traveled through the ground and it zapped the doctor. She lost some of her abilities as well as her memory. One of the others with her also had all kinds of physical and mental problems. I guess the other aliens weren't impressed with these three volunteers. It took years before Dr. Howe was back to her old self. It turns out the ranch contains a portal of huge interest to the Greys, right up there with the Skinwalker Ranch. Things from other dimensions would use the ranch to come and go in order to do whatever it was they wished. It was not the spirits of those who died on the ranch causing problems. These spirits were trapped there due to the enormous energy on the property. All the death was caused by the portal and those who wanted to control it. The Palo Verde nuclear power plant is less than 40 miles from the ranch. This could have had some connection to what was going on inside the property, or it could be why the government granted a permit to build the plant where it was put. John began talking to folks about the ranch and the things going on there. During one video interview, the host spotted something peeking from around the corner behind John. It kind of looked like a gray. EMF detectors would go nuts while being used on the ranch. Some video cameras go haywire while filming. If the investigators walk out through the gate, everything goes back to normal. Only while standing on the property do these weird anomalies occur. The folks from Ghost Adventures spent the night at the Stardust Ranch, and they had some weird things happen to their cameras and recorders. John has been on several radio shows, such as Coast to Coast AM. Groups of 3. It's kind of odd how this subject keeps coming up. Travis Walton said when he was on board the spaceship, there were 3 grays looking down at him. John said just about every time he saw the aliens, there were 3 of them. Dr. Howe came to the ranch with 2 companions, and the church guys came in a group of 3. They had seen 3 grays looking out through the portal. I have no idea why 3 is such an important number in this story, but it keeps coming up. Over the years, things happened that were just unexplainable. John was working in his shed when somebody fired a rifle, sending a bullet through the wall close to where he was standing. There was a hole, but he couldn't figure out how they did it, or who did it, or how they managed to hit the wall right next to where he was standing. There were no windows or doors for the shooter to see him by. The sheriff's deputy took the statement and asked all the usual questions and then left. On another occasion, John saw a huge flying craft sitting in the sky over his ranch. He called the sheriff's department and they sent out a deputy. The deputy looked at the flying craft, looked at John and said there's nothing they could do about it. No report was made and no paperwork filled out. The deputy had made sure to remove his name tag and anything that might have identified him by name. Neighbors who had also seen the huge craft said they called to make a report and were told the sheriff's office didn't take reports of unidentified flying objects. The ending of this tale is also confusing. I heard from one source that the ranch was finally sold and John and Joyce moved to Maine. They took all their dogs and their horses with them. In another story, I heard they still own the ranch and they allow researchers to go out and look around. John is accepting donations to help stave off the cost of all of his animals. He had some things to say about climate, also the economy, and things going on around us and how it's all being orchestrated by the Greys. He had what he called friendly aliens, but they were not much on helping out. They tell him things, but they don't do much to fix the other invaders that are going on. It's nothing like a movie where the Martians come blasting along trying to take over. It sounds as if the alien invaders have already pretty much succeeded. The book might rub some of y'all the wrong way, depending on how much faith you have in our government, the entertainment industry, the folks on TV who want to tell us how we should all live, and the folks in charge who are living high on the hog at our expense. Too many folks with too many stories to keep it all straight. As for the weird activity at the Stardust Ranch, things are still being seen in the skies over Arizona. People are still losing livestock to unknown killers. The government admits there are things flying overhead that are not ours, they're not Russian, they're not Chinese, yet they want us to believe that flying saucers are just imaginary. They won't even call them UFOs, they call them UAPs instead. I guess the UFO moniker just burns a hole in their tongue when they try to say it. If you want to read the book Stardust Ranch by Joyce Edmonds, you can find it at Amazon.com. If you enjoyed the show and you want to show people that you listen to strange things, check out the t-shirts at tpublic.com or maybe buy a book or two from Amazon. All that money will help pay for things that I use for the show, and it'll help keep my lights on. If you enjoyed this show half as much as I did, then I enjoyed it twice as much as you. I heard that somewhere. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell everybody they need to be listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Until next Saturday, this is your host, signing off again.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?